Good morning, everyone. I'm Jonathan Drapkin. I'm the president and CEO of Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress. Thanks for coming. Clearly, we have a large turnout this morning, which is good. Remember, we'll go through some ground rules and everything, but first I'd like to get the not so new, but new president of Marist here, Mr. David Yellen, to come up and say a few words and welcome everyone to his campus.
Good morning. Thanks for being here, everyone. Yes, I'm David Yellen. I've been president of Marist for 10 months now. Not quite as long as Dennis in his 37 years, but I'm getting there. And it's a pleasure to welcome you to campus today. This is apparently the fourth year in a row we've hosted this event of Pattern to support across the aisle from Pattern for Progress. And as I've learned since I've been here, Pattern plays a unique role in the Hudson River Valley in that it unites all sectors, business, nonprofit, higher ed, and government to look at issues from a regional perspective. And in doing so, they serve a really valuable service. So I'd like to thank Jonathan and his team for their leadership in bringing us together for today's discussion. I'd also like to welcome back to campus Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney, who just arrived, and of course, new Congressman John Faso. We're fortunate to host this event that engages our two local congressmen in an important conversation. And I have to say, just personally, you know, Congressman Maloney knows this, but I worked in the House of Representatives as a young lawyer many years ago, and to see members from opposite parties sitting down to have an intelligent, reasonable discussion on issues and maybe find common ground. It takes me back 30 years. It actually used to get done frequently. So I'm really ecstatic to see that.
We haven't done it yet today.
So
wait till after to.
So again, thank you and enjoy the event.
Thank you, David. And if I can, the chairman of Pattern for Progress, Mike Totoro.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for coming. This is such a great event for Patterns. We just want to welcome Congressman Fazio and Congressman Maloney. It is an important time. Despite what we see on television, it is important that you're here so that you can see actually Republicans and Democrats actually do work together, and this will be further proof of how they are working together. I want to thank everybody for their support of Patterns. It is very much appreciated and very much needed, and want to look forward to your continued support in 2017. Thank you all very much for coming.
Awesome. Thanks, Ace.
Yeah, as if you can't hear me. Okay, good morning. So let me first do a couple of thank yous. And I want to thank Marist, of course, and then the Chazen Companies, Normet, and Marshall and Sterling for sponsoring today's event. So thank you to them. Quick thank you to, of course, the Pattern staff and all the staff here at Marist that work so hard to make this look so seamless, but it's really deeply appreciated from myself to my staff that they take the time to really make certain that these things happen, and then they say you just need to go sit there and do what you do, which is what my kids think. I talk for a living. And then, of course, Marist that does such a great job here. Let me just explain, actually, I want to explain a little bit about the history, then I'm going to ask Stu to go through quick ground rules, but we've got, it's a tight, we know we could do this discussion for hours, but unfortunately, you know, we don't have that, and so we have to do this pretty quickly. So, a couple of years ago, as David referred, we had this notion of trying to get the two congressmen that represent the sort of the upper part of the Hudson Valley, where we had a Democrat and a Republican, to sit together to have a discussion. This is not a debate. It is a discussion. It is an exchange of ideas. it is something that former Congressman Chris Gibson pulled me aside after the first year, and he said to me, you know, Jonathan, I wish this took place in every congressional district. I wish that we had an opportunity to do this and just exchange ideas and just talk to each other. Doesn't mean we agree. Clearly we don't. But more than ever, it is necessary in this country to have this kind of dialogue. And so that's what Pattern was seeking to do when we set the structure for this up. And we called it across the aisle. We did not invent that term, the notion of trying to reach across the aisle and to talk to each other. You know, New York State used to have 45 congressmen. Today we have 27. And so both of them are very important to us. Doesn't mean you have to agree with every position they have, but you have to respect the fact that they put themselves out, they run for office, they're there and willing to say, I represent my district, and that means they get attacked by all sorts of people for not representing that point of view. But I do ask you today to sit here and just for an hour or so respect the fact that they're here and they're willing to be part of the effort to make the Hudson Valley better. So with that, I want to just turn to Stu Shinsky for a second here and just explain how we're going to do Q&A and how we're going to try to involve you as the audience.
Good morning, folks. Thank you very much for coming out on just a beautiful day. Just a beautiful day. A few things for you. First off, we are going to alternate who responds first in the spirit of fairness and balance. So as Jonathan asks the questions, each side of the aisle will be able to answer first as they take turns. But this is also about you. These discussions work so well because we like to involve you. So we ask you, on your table, you will see the placards, the vertical placards, and on there are directions on how you can enter your questions to be submitted that we can submit to the congressman. We ask you to tweet your questions to @HVPattern. You can post them on our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/patternforprogress. Or, yes, there is a pen and paper. I will be coming around. I'll be coming around and collecting the questions. If you do have a question, just sort of raise it in the air and I'll come by and get them. What we're going to try to do is pair the questions that come in as best as we can to the topics that we have, but please ask the question that you'd like to ask, and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can. So again, please take a second. You can tweet us at HVPattern, facebook.com/patternforprogress, post your question. And we also ask you to join us on social media. Please like our Facebook page so you can get regular updates about what Pattern for Progress does. And please follow us on Twitter at HVPattern. You'll be glad you did. Thank you.
Thanks, Stu. So here's what'll happen is I've explained to both of the congressman's staff that there is not an opening statement. I don't spend time going through the biographies and everything. You should have that in front of you in the program for today's event. But they will let me know, hey, it's time to stop, which will be somewhere around 10-ish. We'll try to respect it as best we can. And then we will allow them the opportunity to make a closing statement if there's something else that they would like to talk about. So let's just jump right in. And we're very fortunate that both congressmen serve on Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. I believe that's correct. And Pattern just released a report on the state of infrastructure in the Hudson Valley. And so given that you're both there, and given that it just seems that the needs so much outweigh the demand for rebuilding, any thoughts about where we can go or how Washington can help the Hudson Valley with regard to infrastructure? It's really...
Good morning. Nice to see you all again. Nice to see my friend Jonathan Drapkin again. See a lot of familiar faces in the audience. Welcome to Patterns for Progress across the aisle, John. It's congratulations on your election, by the way. It's not an easy district. He had a big win. He won by a lot more than I won the first time or the second time. And so he did a great job in the campaign, and he's off to a great start in Congress. I will tell you, you have big shoes to fill in this forum.
Oh, yeah.
Chris Gibson and I were so often appearing together. I may have overdone it on that a little bit because I just liked him so much. I thought he was such a good public servant, and we need more guys like him. So if any of you here are talking to Chris, tell him I said nice things about him. We do miss him in Congress. And I will tell you that New York Republicans are in a special position in the Congress, and nowhere more so than on things like infrastructure. And part of the reason is because New York Republicans have a different take on a lot of things or traditionally do, or at least successful ones in tough districts like mine or like John's. And it's because there's just a different view of things like infrastructure here, of things like labor protections within infrastructure, Davis-Bacon rules, prevailing wage. They typically have a different view on things from Planned Parenthood to Medicaid spending, to things that are really important in New York. And John is going to have to navigate the boundaries of those issues with a national party that is increasingly, unfortunately, in my view, very hostile to some of the things that are really important to New York. It's ironic because it's the first New York president we've had since FDR, and you would think that would put us in better stead. And I think so much of what's happening in the Trump administration is still up in the air. It's still hard to know. We really haven't passed any major legislation yet under the Trump administration, which is itself pretty remarkable. And so whether you're talking about healthcare or infrastructure or things like tax reform that need to get done, that some of us want to work on across the aisle, we just haven't gotten there yet. And so that's a growing frustration. On this issue, we passed a $300 billion bill, 6-year bill last fall. Just wanted to give John a little head start on the committee. But it's a 10% increase in transportation funding for New York. That's a real thing. You are seeing this at work already. I'm very proud to say that we are going to get 684 resurfaced from start to finish. It is the only thing people in Westchester talk to me about. I'm sure there are other issues for people in Westchester. I have never heard one. That is the number one thing. And that will get done. Promises made, promises kept. But more than that, I passed legislation that will put another $1 billion with a B to work for New York for these local bridges that are in a lousy state of repair. There's money in this bill that I had something to do with, had a lot to do with, on grade crossing safety and on train technologies to make our commuter trains safer. We are going to get the interchange done 5 years ahead of schedule at exit 131 in Orange County for Woodbury Common, so that you can all go in there and get a great deal and not spend a year in traffic. And there's a lot more we're doing, from the Tappan Zee Bridge to a million other things that we should be focused on. We act like we're a poor country sometimes. We're not. We need to invest in our own country. I think we ought to have a capital budget for the United States. We have so many infrastructure needs we should be working on, and we do not need to do it all with public dollars. I can work with the president on public-private partnerships. I am happy to deploy private capital to infrastructure projects in certain cases. I think we should link repatriation of corporate profits held overseas to infrastructure. I have a piece of legislation with my friend John Delaney that would create a $50 billion, would capitalize with $50 billion an infrastructure entity. You can call it a bank, you can call it something else, that would, when leveraged up and with loan guarantees and the rest, put about $700 to $800 billion to work in infrastructure over the next 10 years outside the traditional funding sources. That's how we will really move the needle. And these are specific ideas. This is not just talking about it. Unfortunately, the president has said he wants to do a $1 trillion bill, but there is no bill. There is no plan. They've literally not put pen to paper. I know the guy, DJ Gribbin, who's in charge of infrastructure in the White House. I actually used to work with him in the private sector. He's somebody I could work with. Gary Cohn, I understand, has this on his plate. He's a New Yorker, former Goldman guy. I have every reason to think that if we get going, we'll get some good stuff done on infrastructure. And I want to say the governor's been a real leader on this and deserves credit. He has really prioritized infrastructure at the state level, and it is absolutely the number one thing we could work on in a bipartisan fashion.
Okay. So let's.
And I'll keep the answer shorter. But,
Well, that's okay, and feel free, John.
but Chris Gibson isn't here, so I figure I could talk a little. No.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, John. Thank you. And Sean, it's great to be serving with you. We've already co-sponsored a number of bills together, and it's important for us to work across the aisle. So I'm delighted to be here. Just on the note of Chris Gibson, he's doing very well. He's teaching 2 courses at Williams College. We both live in Kinderhook, a block away from each other. It's only 50 minutes to get to Williams from Kinderhook. He loves that. But he also, the most important thing he's doing, he's the assistant JV baseball coach at the Ichabod Crane High School, where his son is on the team. So knowing Chris like I do for over 30 years, that really was a priority for him. But he's doing great, and so I'll give him all of your best, and you too, Sean. Infrastructure, yes, this is a place where I think you'll see bipartisan cooperation. I think there's a lot of interest on the part of both sides. We serve on the Public Works and Infrastructure Committee together. We also are on agriculture together, and that's really important. Next year we're going to have a farm bill. That's going to be really important for the Hudson Valley and the Catskill area that I represent. Private capital is going to be critical to get to fund some of these projects. They do this very frequently in Europe, in Canada, in Australia, and other places around the world. You've got to have a revenue source that's going to be able to repay the investors. That's significant. But we have significant major mega projects that affect not just this region, but just surrounding our region. The Gateway project, bringing those Amtrak trains from New Jersey into New York, affects our whole northeastern corridor. I would like to see that, we could explore that in terms of trying to get private capital into a project like that. And we could also, airports. Joe Biden famously said that New York's airports were like a third world country. And the reason is because he was right. And many places around the world, they have successfully privatized concessions at airports because you've got a lot of revenue streams that are thrown off at airports that can make that feasible. The key, the ultimate thing in terms of local infrastructure, roads, bridges, water, sewer, the state just adopted a plan over 5 years, $2.5 billion of backdoor borrowing, I would note. They didn't go to the voters for the approval, but be that as it may, the bottom line is that the largest source of pollution into the Hudson River is the combined stormwater and sewage overflows from municipal treatment plants. We need to, as we get these higher frequency storms, we need to have more resiliency. And so the water and sewer projects are ones that are high on my priority. We have them all throughout our district. And the question ultimately on all of these things is where do you get the money? You know, our side is reluctant to increase deficits, but the fact of the matter is we should have a user system where we ask users to pay for the facilities and the infrastructure that they're going to use, in my mind, because that would be a fiscally prudent way to do it, and it also would be something that would not increase our debt and deficits. I also serve on the Budget Committee. Sean is very fortunate to not have to serve on the Budget Committee because I can tell you that is an area where it is gruel and heartache every single day. We're going to go back right after this recess break that we're on, and the first order of business is the fiscal 18-19 budget. And I can tell you the budget, CBO told us almost 2 months ago now that our national debt is $19 trillion, but within 10 years, that national debt is expected to be $29 trillion in 10 years. So these are real, there are real consequences. If interest rates go up by 1%, it's an increase of $160 billion a year in interest payments on our debt. So these are things that we've got to also consider. So that's why when we talk about infrastructure, I'm really also focused on making sure we have stable, sustainable revenue sources to pay for it, because adding more debt on our kids and grandchildren isn't necessarily the most prudent or wise thing for us to do.
Perfect. Okay, Stu, over to you, because we found that this is a good way to integrate the audience, and my apologies to both Congressmen. I don't know what comes at me when I go to the audience, and so, Stu?
Welcome to my world.
All right, we are starting to get some questions on Twitter. We have a question that does relate to infrastructure, but specifically infrastructure funding. The Housing and Urban Development Secretary indicated that housing funding cuts may become part of infrastructure appropriations. What are your thoughts on that? Start with Sean Maloney.
Yeah, is that something Ben Carson said? Is that what you're saying? The Secretary said that?
It says the HUD Secretary indicated housing funding cuts may become part of infrastructure appropriation.
Right. I don't know what Dr. Carson is talking about. I'm not sure he does either.
Okay.
To be really honest with you, I do think he might be referring to the way we support affordable housing through volume cap and through sort of preferential financing for developers that include a portion of affordable housing in their developments, which is a good approach and it works well. I'm not sure what he's talking about, and I don't know that he speaks for the administration. So I don't want to add more confusion to what I think is an off-the-cuff remark.
I generally don't tweet, and I think it's advisable for most high government officials to resist tweeting.
Except here this morning, it's okay.
And if you asked me to send a question to this forum on Twitter, I wouldn't know how to do it.
Okay.
You can do it at HV Pattern. Okay,
Well,
back to you, Jonathan.
That's better than how I butchered Twitter at the last event. Yes, all of you remember, so yes, I need my kids. So, all right, let's move on. We're in a
Okay,
college.
just for the record, I know how to use Twitter and I know what it is. So you guys can understand. What the hell's going on here?
I would like
There
my
are limits to
you
this
can't-
get along on stage thing. I'm not,
Hold on a second.
Good Lord,
I
John.
need my, I need my 19-year-old. I
Both
need my
congressmen are on
19-year-old,
Twitter.
But I need my 19-year-old, and I'm going to use this to go right to the next question, which is, shows she is at Ohio State, and she called last night at 11:30, not realizing her father was trying to go to sleep, but wanting to wish me well this morning, which was very nice of her. But that brings me to college debt. And there's no question, some people even refer to it after housing as the next bubble. Your thoughts, so we'll start with you, John. College debt, is there some thoughts about what do we do with it, or it's fine the way it is, or any thoughts about what we do to make college more affordable?
Well, I mean, I think that it's interesting to note that the greater availability of student lending has enhanced the increases in student costs at colleges. And I do think that there have been a fair amount of serious literature that has discussed the fact that as we've made greater availability of loans, plus loans to parents, student loans to students, we've seen increases in costs at the college level. So I think that one of the things that I think needs to be done, and I think Marist actually does a pretty good job at this, just a little plug for them, is the colleges need to be able to tell a prospective student and their parents what the costs are and what's your likelihood if you get a degree from us in X, what's the likelihood you're going to find a job? And I think, frankly, this is one of those areas where we basically just cast our net out there, and there's not a lot of forethought in terms of what the likelihood is of successful being able to successfully get a job that's going to allow you to repay. And I do think that we've got to look at some other alternatives. Obviously, there are some student loan forgiveness programs, which I've supported. I've actually introduced legislation with Joe Courtney and a couple of others, Joe Courtney, a Democrat from Connecticut, that would allow young farmers to take advantage of some of the student loan forgiveness going into agriculture. But I also think that we've got to be much more frank in this discussion with people in terms of what are you getting for your money, and what's the likelihood you're going to be able to get a job so that you can repay this debt you're assuming. And I don't think that connection is really being made. And I think lately people are starting to really get focused on it, but I'm not sure how much they're really getting that information ahead of time. So I think that's critical. There are also alternatives. I mean, the community college sector, if you look at some of the distance learning approaches that some people are talking about, being able to revolutionize the college experience in terms of getting credit much more cheaply, I think that's something we have to look at. Letting more high school students be able to take college-level courses to lessen the time they'll have to spend at college, but also lessening the costs. I think that's something we have to look at. And the colleges, let's face it, face demographic pressures because I'm part of the baby boom generation. When I went to SUNY Brockport, there were over 11,000 kids at SUNY Brockport. Today, I think there's 7,500. Look at our school districts. Every school district in my congressional district is seeing declines in population. It's another reason why we need to deal with the immigration issue smartly, because a lot of colleges are finding it more difficult to bring foreign students in to take advantage of our institutions of higher learning. And so I'm a big proponent of getting immigration done right and reforming it, and not just focusing on security, which is important, but fixing the whole process.
Great. I did that question to the folks that were with me recently when I spoke with about 50 young professionals. It was probably one of the most important issues on their mind, that as they graduate, they're saddled with this
Right.
incredible amount of debt, and it changes the whole way in which they look at the world. Sean?
Yeah, it's a number one problem I hear about from moms and dads and kids. I have 2 interns here today, I think. Amy, are you here? And Tim McGrath, two Marist students who I should give a shout out to, who work in my office. We did a roundtable here with Dr. Yellen not long ago on this issue of student loan debt, and we talked about some of these ideas. Look, number one, and I say this with all due respect to my friends in higher education, college costs too damn much. It is nuts that college is $70,000 a year. That's crazy. I don't know how we ever got to the place in America where we think you need to spend $70,000 after-tax dollars a year to educate your kid. I tell you what, you get me 3 Jesuits and a kitchen table, I can educate a kid. Right? I mean, it is not that expensive to teach the basics and the essentials in life, and it sure as hell isn't aligned with employment the way it ought to be. And so it's one thing to get a great liberal arts education like a lot of us had when you could afford it, and you could maybe work your way through it, or maybe take a little debt, or both. And if your folks saved and did the right things, they could feel like they were doing the right thing by you and not putting their house in jeopardy or their retirement in jeopardy to get you through school. It is, I mean, how is a middle-class family, now I know most people don't pay full freight, and I know most people get help. And so I know that's a sticker price, and a lot of people pay less. But some people pay it, and a lot of people take a lot of debt. And the average debt right now of a student in New York is, I don't know, over $30,000. And I meet people all the time who say, we paid for undergrad, and then my kid went to law school and paid $70,000 a year for law school, and now we got $250,000 of debt for that. I mean, my mom and dad had 6 kids, 5 sons and my sister. My sister has a very serious developmental disability and needed full-time help. That left 5 of us to go to school. They sent 5 of us to college on 1 income. My mom worked at home. My dad sold insurance. Right? There's not a middle-class family in America today that can send 1 kid to college on 2 incomes. That is wrong, ladies and gentlemen. And we shouldn't talk ourselves into government programs to try to prop up tuition at $70,000 a year, number one. Sorry, that's my rant on that subject. But within the world we live in, yeah, look, number one, we should let every kid refinance their student loans. Nobody should be paying 7, 8, 9, 10% right now. That one thing would help millions of families just finance this, right? And by the way, that's your government that's doing that to you, because we took the privates out of it, and the government is collecting that interest. So it is appalling that we are literally trying to balance the budget to raise some money on the backs of families by charging them out of market interest rates. The whole point of getting the privates out of it was to make it more affordable and to let you capture the savings in your families. Number one. Number two, and I have legislation that would do that, called the Bank on Students Act with Senator Gillibrand. Number two, loan forgiveness ideas like the one he's talking about, related to service in your community, related to doing important professions like law enforcement or teaching or farming. I mean, we can do much better on allowing people to pay back in creative ways or forgive debt in creative ways, and we should do that. And we should take the hit to do that. We are crippling a whole generation with debt. They can't form households, they can't buy a car, they can't make that mortgage payment because they're paying their student loan debt. You know this. Every family I talk to deals with this. And that's why your kid is living in your basement and not getting his right. I mean, I love my 27-year-old. I am really happy. He pays his own rent and lives in his own apartment, right? By the way, that's why that one thing in healthcare of letting people keep their kid on their insurance policy is so important to 26, because kids are paying their student loans. You know this. So this is a huge issue for folks. And I agree, Marist does a great job, and so many schools try to work in an imperfect system to try to make these numbers line up. But I think we need to keep sight of the basics on this. And I do think there are ways that we can work our way through it. And some of the proposals out there for free tuition, I think, are problematic. But what you're seeing is a response to folks saying, we can't cripple kids with a decision to go to college, because it is now a rational decision to not. Or you're going to see a huge shift out of institutions like this one into community college for 2 years, where you get an associate's degree in an affordable way. And I think community colleges are actually going to lead the way on this because they're going to be seen as such a powerful value for what they're giving you. And there's some wisdom in that. And we should realign work, education with work. I don't think there's anything wrong with kids getting an education that allows them to support themselves right away. My dad had a Latin major and a history major and a French major, and then when I got to college, he said, "You are not going to be any one of those things because your brother's, throwing bags on the belly of a TWA plan my brother was a baggage handler at TWA with a French degree from Dartmouth." My dad had enough of that. He said, "You're going to go to work, and your education ought to have to do with how you support yourself." And by the way, I know I'm going on and on, but by the way, the old model is not going to be the one that we have in the future. You cannot go to school for 12 years and then 4 years of college and compete in this economy. Education has to be lifelong, and it has to be aligned with skills and employment. We are going to lose a whole generation of folks who are going to get automated out of their positions in the next 10, 15 years through automated driving and all sorts of other technologies that are coming down on us real quick. And we better get used to the idea that all of us are going to need to be integrating learning and skills development as we go through life. And that is the future. And making that affordable and aligning it with employment is the key to working through this crazy system we're in, where we educate ourselves in ways that may or may not relate to getting a job, and then we are saddled with debt when we're done.
Okay, and we're going to get back to that if we have time. Stu?
That topic generated lots of questions. I'm going to put a few together here, and to summarize, we'll start with Representative Faso. One of the questions is, well, for those folks who have college debt, what can you do to help them bring that debt down? And a sort of related question is, since the election, many women are interested in running for office. How are you encouraging more women to serve? So a question about college debt, and then once you're into the field, how your career might help.
I think the proposal that Sean advanced is a good idea. There's no reason why some of these loans, and both my kids, so my wife and I paid for our kids, went to 4 years of private colleges. That was a lot of money. But my son went to law school. He borrowed the money, and he came out of law school in Albany with about $100,000 in debt. Our daughter got her master's in public health from Emory, and she came out of that program a year ago now with about the same amount of debt. So it is. I see this firsthand. So it would be. I think refinancing the college debt would be important. At the same time, I really do believe that we've kind of misled many students and their families as to the likelihood that they're going to get an employment. And the colleges really need to do a much better job, it seems to me, as I said before, in letting people know, full disclosure, transparency, those words we love, those expressions we love in other contexts. Why is it so opaque when it comes to your likelihood of getting gainful employment when you come out of one of these institutions with a degree? And I also believe that much more career and vocational education should be encouraged in our high schools. And I think we've gone way too far in the opposite direction in insisting that everyone has to get a 4-year college degree. I don't think that's necessarily true. And I think this notion of so-called free college is, I find it dubious because, frankly, at the same time that the state now is saying free college tuition at SUNY, they're also constricting what SUNY can spend for capital and other things that they have to accomplish. So you can take it from here, you can take it from there. I think the notion of something being free, though, we tend not to value things as much when they are labeled as free, and we know there's no such thing truly as free. We have in New York State a very generous tuition assistance program. It's over $1 billion a year. It's something when I was in the legislature I strongly supported, and I think that's good. It's an income-based effort to help people, but it also requires their responsibility, and I think we should not engender a less responsible behavior or encourage people to engage in something on the notion that it's now free. I don't think that really works. Oh, and women in politics. I mean, I think it's vitally important. I mean, I think the Democrats have done a little better job at this than the Republicans, but we have an opportunity, I think, constantly to get more women involved. It's tough to go through this process and to raise the money. It intimidates a lot of people. I've had a lot of female candidates prospectively when I was in the legislature and elsewhere say, I really don't want to subject myself and my family to this, but I think that's changing. As women attain their rightful role in the workplace, in the private sector, in academia, et cetera, I think this is going to, in many respects, solve itself. I think a lot of women are coming forward to run, and I think that's great, and I think it is vitally important. And I think, as I've observed in Congress and in the state legislature, I think the women on both sides of the aisle tend to be much more practical about getting things done than a lot of the men. And as someone married to a nurse who is extraordinarily practical in everything she does, she tells me all the time about when I'm veering off course. So I think that's extraordinarily important to get more women involved in politics.
Sean, as you well know, my boss is your friend as well, my wife, and so,
Yeah, well, you're smart to work for her. She knows what she's doing. She's my lawyer, by the way. Paula, is she here?
Yeah. Paul?
Where is she? She's hiding in the back.
All right.
You can hold him to that. You heard him say it. So look, women in politics, well, John and I both beat female candidates, so we come to this with unclean hands in a way.
Speak for yourself.
So there is that. Well, yeah, no.
I was very happy to
That's
win
the
my
difference.
last
But no, come on. I think that well, and I'm tempted to say, you guys keep going after Planned Parenthood. You're going to see a lot of women run for office, and maybe that'll get the message through. But look, we do have a more diverse party. I think we carry some of the difficulties of that. I think because we are sometimes seen as running around trying to make every individual group happy, and we forget to speak more broadly to folks who don't see themselves as part of some discrete group. And yet, I think it's to our credit that we are focused on inclusion and diversity and equality. There are some sort of rubber meets the road issues, I think, that I could tick through that I think are important, particularly to people who are thinking about running for office and whatnot. Look, people should run. Women should run. If you're thinking about running for office, please do. We need you. Don't run for Congress, right? Like right here. You can, but maybe a little north of here. No. But people can run, but there's so many other ways to get involved. And I do think we are a better, stronger Congress when we look like America, when we represent all the people who put food on the table and who get the kids to school and worry about paying the mortgage and how to retire. And I am absolutely in agreement with John that sometimes guys can't get out of our own way, and I think it does help to have other voices in Congress.
Okay. Let me go on to the next one, which is the federal budget, and I have to admit, after watching the news last night, I'm a little confused, and hopefully both of you can help me with the threat of a shutdown, and I don't know if that's related to the inability to find a budget or some other issue, but hopefully you can help me. On a micro level, there's a small little program which many of us rely on called CDBG, Community Development Block Grants, and it doesn't matter if you're Democrat, you're Republican, throughout both of your districts, there are small towns, there are small villages, Democrats, Republicans, they use it to rebuild Main Street, they use it to rebuild the firehouse, and yet it was announced that that is on the chopping block. But either if you can speak directly to CDBG, reassure some people in the audience, or if you wish to broaden the question to the federal budget and what you're thinking of doing to bring something back in that budget to the Hudson Valley. John?
Well, the Congress last year didn't pass all the appropriations measures, So there's, I think, April 28th is the date. I'm anticipating, and there's a negotiation going on bipartisan-wise to enact an omnibus appropriation bill that'll carry us through the rest of the fiscal year through September 30th. I fully support it. I don't support a shutdown. And it is the Community Development Block Grant proposal was one the President made in this FY18 budget. This is the budget that's going to start on October 1. I don't support the majority of what he's proposed for the discretionary domestic side of the budget. And actually, I know most of the Democrats don't, and I can tell you most of the Republicans, at least on the Budget Committee, are very concerned about the approach. CDBG, the Community Development Block Grant Program, CDC, NIH, NOAA, EPA, the Peace Corps, the soft power agencies that we use, the NGOs to help project American strength and goodness around the world. As Jim Mattis said a few years ago in another context, he said, if you don't fund the State Department, you got to buy me more bullets. And it's vitally important that the U.S. not leave a void in the world by allowing the Chinese and the Russians and others like the Iranians to fill that void. We must project the goodness of America and the strength of America, and that's very important for us to do that. So I think the bottom line is that I'm very hopeful that we can have a bipartisan agreement to extend the appropriations through the rest of this year, and I'm hopeful that we can get some of these subsidies that are now being argued about in terms of the ACA for the insurers to help fund premiums for people who can't afford their policies right now through the exchanges. That's, to me, is something that's critical to do. And I think that FY18 is going to be tough. As I mentioned, we've got a lot of fiscal problems with our deficit and debt in our nation. Frankly, Congress has just kicked the can down the road for many years. I really don't want to go down there and practice kicking cans. I want to try to solve this problem. So that's how I look at it. Sean?
Yeah, I mean, ask Rob Rollison about CDBG, right? I mean, this is how you're going to revitalize Main Street Poughkeepsie. And so when Mick Mulvaney comes out, who's the budget director, and says we're going to eliminate that program, which means Meals on Wheels, by the way, and a bunch of other stuff. I mean, they're playing a game. I mean, I don't know how else to say this. They're playing a game, and the game is called, we don't want to touch entitlements yet. We don't know what we're going to do on that. That's where all the money is. The president tells me he wants a big increase in defense budget, so I'm going to put $50 billion on the defense budget. And then without touching entitlements, I got to go to the discretionary domestic budget and find $50 billion. Oh, by the way, I got to pay for a wall too, because the Mexicans apparently haven't written a check yet. And so that means I got to go in my budget document and find $50 billion plus of cuts in the domestic discretionary budget, which we have been cutting, by the way, every year since 2011 under the Budget Control Act and the whole sequester. And the cupboard's pretty bare there to begin with. Anybody who works in this space knows this. It's about 14% of your total budget. So common sense will tell you you're not going to get very far with cuts there. And so what do you do? So you come out with this thing that says we're going to whack everything from Big Bird to CDBG to Meals on Wheels to the National Institutes of Health to the research we do against Zika virus and Ebola virus. And everywhere government does actually good work, we're going to whack. And it's just not serious. I mean, it would be one thing if it was part of a comprehensive effort to balance the budget, right? And then guys like me might say, oh, those cuts are going to be tough. But the response would be, but we're going to tighten our belts and balance this budget, right? I could respect that. That's not what's going on here. This proposal doesn't take $1 off the deficit. It just gets you the line of scrimmage because they want to cover these proposed increases in defense. Look, a serious approach would be to sit down quietly early on when you're still at the height of your power with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell and say, how are we going to do a big deal that's going to involve everything? And we're really going to put this country on a glide path to deficit reduction and to balance. And it doesn't have to be next year, but it ought to be in 10, 15, 20 years. But let's give the business community and everybody else the confidence and the predictability that we are going to keep our fiscal house in order. And to do that, we all have to make tough choices, and we're all going to sign in blood, and we're going to come out holding hands, and we're going to pass it 5 minutes later because there's going to be hell to pay. That's what it would look like if you wanted to balance the budget. And a lot of guys like me, and I believe he would take a tough vote to do the right thing on that. Unfortunately, the president has not gotten off to a good start. And I don't say unfortunately as some cynical politician, like, secretly thinking this is great for my party. I really mean it. We don't have a presidency to waste in America. We can't afford a president to spend the first year of his term doing nothing because they are so inept and disorganized that they can't line up their own health care bill, their own infrastructure bill, their own tax reform bill. I mean, we only got one president at a time. I really mean it that I want to work with this president on debt and deficit reduction. I want to work with him on health care reform. I want to work with him on infrastructure. I will absolutely work with him on tax reform. And I would love to do something on immigration. You do those 5 things, you all will be living in an economy that's growing faster than 2%. You will have some predictability and stability. Your government will work in the areas where it should work. And you can have some confidence that you have some adults down in Washington who are making good decisions. There are those of us in competitive seats who get rewarded for acting and sounding like this. Unfortunately, too many of our colleagues are rewarded for driving the other way, out to the extremes of the left and the right. And it's one of the things that's really killing us. But there's only one president at a time. I can't do it. John can't do it. He has to do it. And so far, unfortunately, they are tied up in their shoelaces on health care. This proposal we're going to deal with next week is a mess, and it is not going to get done. And that's going to hold up everything else. And so I am unfortunately not real positive on where we are. And I spent the last week in Seoul, South Korea, and at the demilitarized zone, and in Japan, meeting with the senior leadership over there and our senior military and diplomatic folks. I can tell you it really matters, his point about not having a team in place for East Asian affairs at the State Department. It is really a bad idea to whack 30% out of the State Department right now. There are major crises happening everywhere in the world, and if we stumble into any one of them, it is going to weaken us on every other issue I just mentioned. It'll suck all the oxygen out of the room and a lot of our resources. So getting these things right, whether it's Iran or Eastern Ukraine or South Korea, North Korea, is critical to the progress we're going to make at home because we have spent too much time and money already on priorities that don't help you here in the Hudson Valley.
History has an opportunity to, well, unfortunately, history sometimes repeats itself. And when you mention the State Department and what happened, the best and the brightest, probably one of the best books written about the Vietnam War, by David Halperson, said that one of the most important reasons we didn't understand what we were doing in Vietnam was because we eliminated everyone in the State Department that had the institutional memory of what was going on there. And let's just be smart about what we do. That's all I wanted to comment about. Let's go to the environment, Sean. So
I'll agree, we should be smart.
and I'll just leave it. Let's just be smart
I
about
don't
it.
care who's against it. I'm going to be smart.
Yep. The congressman, obviously the Hudson River is important to the region, both as a natural resource and as a component of our economy. What steps or measures would you be taking to protect the river? And what is your position with regard to the plan on the anchorage and the barges, which I know you've spoken out on?
Yeah,
So, Sean?
been very active on both of these things. I'm working very hard to get the PCBs out of the Hudson River once and for all. We can do this. Ladies and gentlemen, we do not have to have a river that is contaminated with PCBs. It's up to us. I wish the Obama EPA had not given the sort of clean bill of health they did to GE the way they've done. I think we could have expected more from GE. I think we still can, by the way. I've been working very close with the governor on this and the Department of Environmental Conservation. We have been successful in getting the governor to join us in this fight, and he's been a real leader now on dredging the Champlain Canal, which is the source of the greatest number of PCBs. So we can get this done. The state's going to lead on it. That's number one. The river is a miracle, and it is so critical to all of our economic development and our waterfront development and our tourism industry and recreation and everything else. And it's a sacred trust. We are stewards of this great American river, and we should be the generation that cleans it up. And it's one of the reasons, by the way, that when you hear about them whacking the EPA, just remember, there is a baby in that bathwater. Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. It is a hell of a lot easier to clean up the the Hudson River if you don't put PCBs in the first place. We have spent 40 or 50 years trying to clean up the environmental damage done because we weren't properly monitoring what was going on. So before we go back to that world where we are so in love with just throwing off all the EPA concerns, we start creating these long tail, really expensive and really damaging problems again. We should fund things like the Superfund program and the rest. I have been successful in getting federal dollars to clean up the water in Hopewell Junction. I don't know if anybody here is from Hopewell Junction. There's a terrible Superfund site there. It's called an orphan site. People have spent 10, 15 years with filters in their water. The air in their homes isn't safe to breathe. These are our neighbors who can't drink the water. $30 million from the National Priorities Board. We got done working with Region 2 here at the EPA. 100% federal solution. They are going to get clean water from a local source. That means economic development for the town of East Fishkill. That means they can move forward without worrying about whether they can sell their homes or not, and their kids are going to grow up with serious problems in their health. That's where the EPA does good work. I get it. It should lay off our farmers. It should lay off our businesses in lots of ways. We can streamline approvals. Sign me up. And Democrats are on the hook for that. We are too in love with regulations and with red tape and all this nonsense that drives everybody crazy. We can do better on that. But there is a real core here, and the river is Exhibit A. In addition, the Anchorage's proposal, I'm working very hard to kill that. John and I both are on the committee that oversees the Coast Guard. I have been all over these guys on this. We got the comment period extended by months. All of you sent 10,000 comments to the Coast Guard. That's more than has ever been sent on anything in their history, and they were 100% negative. I mean, literally. Not one person said, I think this is a good idea. For those of you who don't know, this would be 10 new birthing sites up and down the river from Yonkers to Kingston. We already have 2 near Kingston and near Yonkers now. It is my belief that they are sufficient, and I think I will predict to you that when the Coast Guard's done wading through all these comments sometime in the summer, you'll see a revised rule that whacks this thing way, way back. But I would have been more confident in that prediction had there been a Clinton in the White House right now, because we were in discussion about that very actively. But I do think the Coast Guard has gotten the message, and I look forward to working across the aisle on this. This, by the way, is a bipartisan issue. Sue Serino's here, I see, who has legislation on this. I've introduced federal legislation that would make very clear where these types of anchorages can be and cannot be. And spoiler alert, it would rule out large parts of the Hudson River where they're thinking about putting them. And so we are full court pressing this thing, and it has been a bipartisan effort at different layers of government, and I believe we'll be successful.
Yeah, I agree. The Anchorage proposal was way too broad, and I think that I've spoken to the Coast Guard as well, and I think that we will see a significant modification of their proposal. Either that or it'll just simply be deep sixed. What I said before about the Hudson in terms of the combined storm sewer and storm water and sewer overflows into the river, that is the major source of pollution in the river today. On the PCBs, I want to see the study, the fish studies that are scheduled to be taking place, and I want to see those evaluations. It was interesting that the governor has become vocal on this as soon as GE decided to move their headquarters to Boston rather than to New York, because he was kind of silent on this matter before that. It was just one of those ironic sets of timings that you sometimes see.
John, I'd rather light a candle than curse the darkness.
Yeah. So I do think it's going to be an ongoing issue for us. The Champlain Canal certainly is one that has a lot of concern from a commercial standpoint as well as an environmental standpoint in the northern part of the river. And I think we should, though, wait and see what the fish studies tell us as to the efficacy of the dredging project that EPA had deemed complete, and take it from there. And let the chips fall where they may. If the studies show that we have to dredge more in more places, then so be it.
Okay, I want to be mindful of time here, so there's something I want to just clear up here with regard to, I'm a former county manager, and I think that there is a statement that you made, and just correct me if I got it wrong, where maybe it was with regard to Medicare,
Medicaid.
Medicaid
Okay.
to do away with the
Okay, so
county.
one of the single worst mistakes that Nelson Rockefeller ever made as governor 51 years ago was when the federal-state Medicaid program, not Medicare, Medicaid, health care for the poor and the elderly, when that program was adopted, New York continued its policy of forcing the county governments and New York City to share in the Medicaid costs. Virtually no other state does it the way New York does it. In fact, if you look at where we are today, there's about $9.5 billion spent by local government taxpayers on Medicaid in the entire country. $9.5 billion. $7.2 billion of that 9.5 is in New York State. The two things people say to me the most in my district, my kids and grandchildren have to move away because they can't find a job, and my property taxes are driving me out of my house. That's what they say overwhelmingly, from northern Rensselaer County to the Pennsylvania line in my district. So I saw this, and I made a promise when I ran last year, and I said, look, I read the federal Medicaid statute. The statute authorizes a local share, but only New York did what New York did. So I drafted legislation, and I stuck it in the health care bill. I don't know if that health care bill is going to move or not. We haven't really talked about this here today, but I've talked to many of you about aspects of it. But I, in 2 months in Congress, put an amendment in that bill which says that in 2020, New York State may no longer impose this local burden on the county property taxpayers. In Dutchess County, that's about 45%, close to 50% of every nickel the county collects in property tax levy goes to Medicaid. The county executive has nothing to say about it. The level of here's the principle of political science. The level of government that confers the benefit, that designs the program, that sets the rules of the program, that's the state, should be the same level of government that has to go to its taxpayers and says, we have to raise the money to pay for this program. Right now, basically, it's like me saying I want a luxury car lease, $500 a month, and I can afford it because I'm going to make Jonathan pay $200 of it. That's what the state has been doing for 50 years to the county property taxpayers. Now, this isn't a panacea for the property tax problem in New York State. We all know that. But just because Nelson Rockefeller made this horrendous mistake, and governors and legislatures of both parties continued this for 50 years, doesn't mean we have to do it for the next 50 years. So I'm committed. I'm bound to determine I'm going to get this thing enacted into law. And we are going to finally stop this horrendous public policy of imposing these costs. Let the state do what its responsibilities are. Let Albany take control of this, and let the county property tax be cut because we no longer have to fund a Medicaid mandate, which if you go to any other state, you won't have to deal with this.
So John is right, in my view, that the state should lift this burden off the counties. And I support that. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Governor Spitzer actually cut in half the percentage the counties were required to pay at that time. It's about 13% now. It used to be higher. Here's the problem. So I support that. I think it'd be the number one thing we could do to help lower your property taxes. Now, by the way, it's not typically a federal issue. He's right. It's at the state level. Problem with the way John's trying to do it is that it is the 30 pieces of silver he asked for to support this terrible Trump care health care bill. So the problem with that, John, is that you're using it as the price for your vote on a health care bill that will whack New York because it will destroy traditional Medicaid program, which will blow a huge hole in the state budget. So it will be counterproductive. And everything else that goes along with that health care bill, from going after people with pre-existing conditions to defunding Planned Parenthood, and all the things that I cannot in good conscience support. So I am delighted to have a conversation about lifting the Medicaid share off the counties, and we should do it. Let's bring it up to the state level. I think that's fair because, by the way, if the state doesn't go along with this plan, then what's going to happen is they're going to screw the counties another way. I mean, there's no stopping the state from coming after the counties for the same amount of money some other way. So without the state agreeing to do this, you're not going to do it at the federal level. So I'm pained to say that I know that John's concern about this is genuine. I think going after it as a sort of price for support and terrible health care bill for New York is a mistake. And I don't think it serves the Hudson Valley well. I also think, respectfully, I also think that that it won't work. Because even in a world where this gets into law at the federal level, you got to have the state working with you on this. And the way to do it is for one thing, we send a lot more money to the federal government than we get back, so we are a donor state. The governor has a counterproposal to John's bill, which a lot of us support, which is legislation as well at the federal level that would say, just give New York what we're overpaying already, because you're not getting your tax dollars back. That would be more than enough to lift this burden off the counties, and we could dedicate it to it. So that's actually a solution that would work. And even if we can't do it at the federal level, we ought to do it at the state level. So I support the idea, I really do. But I would never go along with this terrible health care bill just because they threw that on the pile for me.
Well,
So I think that's a mistake.
I'll take a little privilege there. Sean, it was not 30 pieces of silver.
That might have been a little harsh, sorry.
Yeah, it was a little harsh. And,
But honestly, like, it's a harsh bill, man. Like, you're going to support a terrible health
but-
care bill
but
for that
the,
stupid thing.
The bottom line is that there were other changes that a number, it's funny, Cuomo just had his hair on fire about this, and then a week later he came out with his own proposal to do the same thing. And as I pointed out, Mario Cuomo proposed to do this in the early 80s, didn't get it done. 50 years we've been hearing from Albany, oh, we're going to take care of this problem. They still have never taken care of it. And I read the federal law, and I realized we could do this at the federal level. And so we didn't get into the ACA and the AHCA. There are a lot of problems with both proposals. But from my vantage point, there were a number of things that we got changed. And Cuomo, when he was calling me a right-wing zealot for proposing this Medicaid proposal, and it's funny because he called me a right-wing zealot in Albany. In Washington, they called me a moderate. So, and so here is one of the things that I insisted on as well, besides my amendment being in this bill, was that we keep the Medicaid expansion through the end of 2019. The state would be paid at the higher rate in the Medicaid expansion after 2020 for all the people that were in the Medicaid expansion, and that for people who are disabled or the elderly in nursing homes, that the per capita Medicaid block grant would get a +1. They would be medical inflation +1. So that's going to dramatically increase the amount that otherwise would happen. And keep in mind, all this proverbial discussion about cuts. This is classic Washington. It's also classic Albany. These aren't cuts in terms of reductions. These are reductions in expected increases in spending. What we're trying to do is to slow the growth of Medicaid by requiring the states, ultimately the 50 states, to take more responsibility in how they run the program. Today, there's no incentive for them to restrict their spending, to reform their program. And I can tell you, there are numerous examples where New York State's Medicaid program could be reformed further. Our program spends more money than Texas and Florida combined. They have more than twice the population of our state. Why do we only have 27 members of Congress? We're down from 43 40 years ago. It's because people are fleeing with their feet. They're voting with their feet in this state because it costs too much to run a business, it costs too much to live here, and there aren't enough private sector job growth. I love nonprofits. I love the nonprofit community, the higher education community. But we cannot build a steady and sustainable economy on the not-for-profit sector that relies largely on government to help pay for them. You have to have a thriving, growing private sector economy to create wealth and to create jobs. That's what New York State is missing. New York City is doing fine. They've got a lot of advantages. But upstate New York, every single county virtually in upstate New York is losing population. Even Dutchess County is lower in population. And so in the last 5 years. So this is what we've got to address. And we've got to address the fact that people are voting with their feet. They're leaving New York because of the tax and regulatory burden that we face and the Medicaid burden that New York, Nelson Rockefeller unwisely imposed on the property tax is just one facet of it, and I'm determined that we fix it.
So I know we're late on time, and I want to do this respectfully, but this is a really important debate, and I want to repeat.
Discussion.
I agree.
Discussion.
Oh, well, on this we're going to have a debate. I mean, no, and that's fine. Look, we don't have to agree with each other. We don't owe you some sort of superficial agreement on issues that affect your lives and your health and your economy. What we owe you is a respectful adult conversation on how we're going to work through it. and to listen to one another. And I have heard that concern because I represent the same communities that are getting whacked by these property tax burdens. I pay them too. Like, we can lift the Medicaid burden off the counties. You're right. Your proposal is not going to work, John. You know it's not going to work. It's never going to get into law, and even if it did, it wouldn't work in the state level. And the idea that you're going to help people's property tax burden by destroying the traditional Medicaid program, which by the way, is $70 billion probably in the all funds budget. The state of New York is probably Medicaid spending. Half of that is federal dollars, maybe more.
63 billion.
And half of that is federal, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so they're going to take $1 trillion out of the Medicaid program with a T over the next 10 years in this terrible health care bill. And what they're doing is they're shifting that burden to the state. And what the state is going to do is going to whack you in other ways. And so we can save money in the Medicaid program. He's right. Hal Teitelbaum's here runs Crystal Run. I mean, and I see my friends here from the hospitals as well. The doctors are against this plan. The hospitals are against this plan. The nurses are against this plan. The AARP is against this plan. Everybody and their brother is against this plan because it will not fix what's wrong with our health care system. It doesn't do anything to fix what's wrong with the Affordable Care Act, and there are things we need to fix. What it does is it cuts every tax on every wealthy person who is paying for the Affordable Care Act, and I understand people don't like taxes. But it takes $1 trillion out of the Medicaid program so they can score it against the tax reform they want to do next. And this is a game we are playing. It is not about fixing health care. And the Medicaid program in New York, if you look at the work of the Medicaid redesign task force, if you look at some of the steps the Obama administration has taken to try to get better outcomes at lower cost, I mean, that's the stuff Hal Teitelbaum has dedicated his career to. I mean, we can get you better outcomes at lower cost. There are smart ways we can do this. There are huge inefficiencies in our healthcare system. And we can lift the Medicaid burden off the counties and put it where it belongs to the state level. But you will not do a good thing if you move forward with this health care proposal, because it will really hurt seniors. It will result in millions, tens of millions of more people without health insurance in this country. It will take us the wrong way on all the kind of innovative steps we have taken to try to share savings with smart organizations that get us better outcomes at lower costs. And it will defund good organizations like Planned Parenthood, and it will set us back in so many areas of public health that you cannot say, I will put up with all that stuff, which is terrible for the state of New York, simply because they gave me this fig leaf of a property tax reduction, which will never work anyway. And so
Well, fig leaf is better
really
than
could
30
not,
pieces of silver, I
could
guess.
not really. I'm trying to be nice, but it's a terrible bill. And this is where the rubber meets the road, I think, for New York Republicans. That's what I was trying to say at the outcome. See, the problem with being a New York Republican in Washington is that they don't value things like funding Metro North and mass transit, because they come from states where that's not a big priority. They prefer roads and bridges. So it's like being an upstate Republican talking to somebody from the city, right? You just have a different perspective. So my New York colleagues like John are constantly dealing with these guys down there, and he's right. They think he's a moderate because he's the guy saying, hey, we think of Planned Parenthood differently, so you're going to defund it. You're putting me in a tough spot. Hey, the Medicaid program is a huge part of the New York State budget, and we are really, really dependent on that here. Anybody got a kid on the autism spectrum? Anybody got a senior, parent they're trying to get in a nursing home? I mean, this is not a luxury. We're talking life or death for people with Medicaid program. You take $1 trillion out of that over the next 10 years, watch what happens to your property taxes. So these are not simple or easy things. And what is motivating this health care proposal by the president and the speaker right now is to save $1 trillion by going after Medicaid so they can give it away in tax cuts and tax reform. That's a fact, and it's the wrong approach. And I would love to work across the aisle with folks who want to actually repair the Affordable Care Act rather than this Trojan horse of tax cuts for the rich that'll really hurt New York.
Okay, since I've completely lost control, and I want to make certain that I'll just throw a little more fuel in the fire on this, and then we'll go to a closing statement. We'll be done.
Okay.
Okay. So,
Yeah, give us something to agree on. We have a great bill on airplane safety kits, by the way, that we're working on together, right? We do. Kids who have allergy attacks on airplanes don't have the right equipment. We have a bill on that that'll help.
all right. Last night, Speaker Ryan and the president both said they're ready to move forward on the health care bill. And I didn't understand what that meant, but given that, John, you're quite right about, we Pattern does a lot of work in demographics. We're not growing upstate. We are aging. The uncertainty of healthcare matters a lot to us in the Hudson Valley. So what do you think is going to happen next?
I think that it's very much up in the air still. And I do think, approach that I've taken is that we should keep what works in the ACA and fix what doesn't. There's a lot that works in it. There are pieces of it that I very much strongly support, but there are a lot of pieces that don't work. And the notion that you were able to keep your health plan and your rates were going to go down, were simply not true. I had a guy in my district a few weeks ago. I've had many people tell me how they've been benefited. And I've had many people tell me, like a guy who told me his premiums went from $10,000 to $18,000 for family coverage, and his deductible went from $3,000 to almost $13,000. That's not affordable insurance. So I think that, frankly, most of these changes, if they're enacted, are going to take place after 2020. There's a lot of room for us to tinker and to try to fix it, because there undoubtedly will be, there are pieces of it I don't support, for instance, the Medicaid hit on Planned Parenthood. I've not supported that. So the fact is that we have opportunities to correct this. Remember, it took them 3 years to implement the ACA once it was enacted in 2010. And this healthcare system is extraordinarily complex and difficult, and there are many aspects in this proposal that I'm not enthusiastic about. But I do think we've got to take steps that finally will begin to change the direction. The ACA over-federalized health insurance. Most of this should be done at the state level. There's a federal role, but most of it should be done at the state level. And I'm hopeful that we can get something done in the near future. But I have no crystal ball as to whether it'll be true or not, whether that's true or not. And we have a group in our caucus, as Sean alluded to, that frankly, they don't want any federal role in anything. And that's very difficult to deal with.
Sean?
Yeah,
What happens?
I certainly don't begrudge, he's right. The Freedom Caucus is really tough on this stuff. And they are not in a pragmatic frame of mind. But we've seen this before. We saw it on the Farm Bill before. We got you the best Farm Bill that's ever been passed for the Hudson Valley. We chased our tails around with these ultra-conservative guys. And, even John Boehner got so sick of it that he came over and we did it with Democratic votes, working across the aisle with Republicans. That bill, by the way, is going to save $100 billion over its 5-year life. So we can do things in a bipartisan way. You cannot chase the right wing forever and then wonder why you don't have any Democratic support for something. And that's what's going on with this bill. They are getting led around by a group of 25 guys in the Freedom Caucus, and the bill's getting worse, not better. They're going to try to jam it in, through the House. It's going to put guys like John in a very tough spot, I can just tell you, politically. And it's going to be a terrible piece of legislation, and it is going to be dead on arrival in the Senate. And that is not what we owe you. What we owe you is sitting down like adults. It would be really hard on us. Look, Donald Trump won my district. I represent a Donald Trump district. Let's be clear. I'm one of 12 Democrats in the House, 12, who represent a seat that Donald Trump won. So who more than I wants to reach across the aisle and work with this president where we can? But I would love to have an opportunity to do that. And the way to put me in a tough spot politically is to come up with something that makes some sense, to say, hey, the Affordable Care Act has these markets that are not working right in certain places. We need to do something about that. By the way, it's working pretty well in New York. But there are places in the country where it's not. And there's places in the country where we're seeing these other effects that we think are bad for a small business or bad for mom and pops who used to be a small group, now can't be. There are lots of things we can do. I've written some legislation on a bunch of this stuff. But that's the way to bring Democratic support in, is to actually talk about what's wrong in this thing. And a bunch of us would break ranks to say, they're right, we want to fix it. I mean it. This bill will do nothing to fix what's wrong with the Affordable Care Act. It won't do a thing to take the cost out of health care. Rob Dyson's here. Talk about the effect it'll have on rural hospitals and the disproportionate share payments they depend on. We are going to do real damage if they get this thing through. And I would be more concerned about it if I thought it stood a snowflake's chance in hell of getting passed. What we are doing instead is we are wasting the most powerful moment in the Trump presidency when he could actually move legislation on something that is a partisan fantasy that will not get done. And that is a shame because as this guy loses steam, you're going to see gridlock reassert itself, and he's missing his chance to be a centrist bipartisan president.
Okay, with that, closing remark, if there's anything you wanted to,
Just
wherever you want to go.
thank you to the organization and to you, John, for inviting us here, and thank you to Sean. It's been a pleasure to work with him for the 3 months that I've been in Congress, and thanks to all of you for coming today. And I look forward to working with all of you as we move forward. It's a great honor and privilege to serve in the Congress. Every day that I go there, I feel a great sense of honor and duty to serve and work for the 725,000 people in our district, to represent them fairly and to listen to all concerns. So I really appreciate everyone coming today, and I'm sorry I didn't really get any breakfast, however. You didn't even offer me a cup of coffee.
Well,
You notice I got my own.
Yeah.
You don't eat in this job.
then
That's
I
what
owe you
learned.
one.
All right.
You spend all your time either starving or stuffed in this job. There's no happy.
It's true.
It's a lot of penne pasta or nothing at all.
Sean, anything you want to?
Look, thank you to Marist College. Thank you to Patterns for Progress, Jonathan, all of you for taking time out of your morning to listen to us. I like John, and I know I'm being a little tough on him on this healthcare thing, but I will tell you, we can work together on a lot of things, and we are on the right committees for the Hudson Valley, agriculture, and infrastructure. There are absolutely things we're going to work on together if we ever get an infrastructure bill going, which I hope we do, and the farm bill, which is in progress right now. In fact, John and I have been talking about bringing the whole agriculture committee up here to the Hudson Valley together to do a hearing here, so that we can impress on the folks in the ag committee that specialty crops are really important, that the crop insurance has to be reformed for our guys, that we have a lot of issues in the Hudson Valley that aren't traditionally top of list for folks who are worried about big producers of the big crops in the Midwest. That's the kind of thing that we can work on across the aisle together and want to do it. Lyme disease is really important. We should be working on that together. Chris Gibson and I did. There's no reason he and I can't. I promise you that I will continue to focus on things where I can agree with John. And we will have these debates in the national things, but I like to tell people I approach Congress the way I approach Thanksgiving dinner. You can go in there and you can pick a fight really easy if you want, right? I mean, it's not hard. Your in-laws are there. Your brother still owes you money. It's really easy, right at the start of Thanksgiving dinner to say, "Hey, Fred, when are you going to pay me back?" And you're off, right? But Congress is the same way. I can go down and find a bunch of things we don't agree on. We can fight all the time, but there's so much we can do together. It's one of the reasons I've passed 25 pieces of legislation in the 4 years you've given me in Congress. Those are all bipartisan things, focused on infrastructure, focused on our farmers, focused on vets, focused on getting your drinking water cleaner. I want to keep doing that. And so thank you for re-electing me. Thank you for this opportunity, and we'll keep doing it. We'll keep having a conversation as long as you'll host us. Thank you.
So, to you. Thank you for your patience. I'm sure lots of you had lots of questions, but we only have so much time. We have this amazing, unique opportunity. We have two incredibly smart people here who serve both on transportation and infrastructure. They both serve on agriculture. And I think the dialogue is constructive in helping to figure out are there ways they can work together. Thanks for coming. Thank you so much, John.
Hey, buddy.